The morning they decided Clara's fate started like any other morning at Calloway's boarding house, which meant it started cruel. "Look at her shoveling that porridge down," Emmeline Garrett said, loud enough that every girl at the breakfast table could hear. "You'd think she ain't eaten in weeks." Clara kept her eyes on her bowl. The oatmeal was thin and tasteless, more water than oats, but it was hot, and it was food. She'd learned years ago that responding only made things worse. "Maybe she ain't," another girl chimed in. Grace Sullivan, 17 and pretty enough to know it. "Maybe she's been sneaking down to the kitchen at night. That why you lock the pantry now, Mrs. Calloway?" Marjorie Calloway didn't look up from her ledger at the head of the table, but her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Not quite approval. Just acknowledgement that she'd heard and chose not to intervene. Clara swallowed another spoonful. Her hands were steady even though her stomach had gone tight. 5 years she'd lived here. 5 years of this exact performance, with minor variations. The words changed, but the music stayed the same. "I heard Thomas Fletcher tried talking to her at the general store last week," Emmeline continued. She was on a roll now, energized by the attention. Walked right past her like she was invisible, didn't even tip his hat. "Can you blame him?" Grace again. "I mean, look at her." Clara did look. Not at them, she'd stopped meeting their eyes a long time ago, but at herself. The reflection in her water glass showed enough. A round face that hadn't seen angles in years. Dark hair pulled back so severely it gave her headaches. A dress that had been let out twice and still pulled across her middle. She was 23 years old and she looked tired. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. "Girls," Mrs. Calloway said finally. Her voice carried no warmth, but it carried authority. "Enough. Clara, when you're finished, I need you to scrub the front steps. They're filthy." Clara nodded. She'd scrubbed them yesterday, but that didn't matter. There was always something that needed scrubbing, always some task that would keep her hands busy and her mouth shut. She finished her oatmeal in silence while the other girls moved on to discussing the dance being held at the Miller farm that Saturday. None of them looked at Clara when they talked about it. She wouldn't be going, she never went. The steps took an hour. The sun climbed higher and turned the April morning from pleasant to sweltering. Clara's knees ached from kneeling on the wood, and her lower back had started that familiar throb that meant she'd pay for this tonight. But she scrubbed until the grain showed clean, until she could see her distorted reflection in the wet boards. She was hauling the bucket around to dump the dirty water when she heard them. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Emmeline's voice, high with excitement. Clara glanced up to see her and Grace huddled near the corner of the house with 2 other girls, passing around a piece of paper like it was treasure. "He'll kill her," one of them said, not bothering to whisper. "Actually, kill her. Don't be dramatic. He'll just send her running back here crying, and we'll finally be rid of the stuttering cow." They hadn't noticed Clara yet. She stood very still, the bucket handle cutting into her palm. Grace looked up first. Her eyes went bright with malice and delight. "Clara? Oh, Clara, come here. We've got something wonderful for you." Every instinct Clara had said to run, to dump the water, retreat to the attic room she shared with 2 other girls, and disappear until whatever this was blew over. But Mrs. Calloway had appeared on the porch, arms crossed, watching. And Clara had learned that running only made punishments worse. She set down the bucket and walked over on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. "What is it?" The stutter caught on the first word. It always did when she was nervous. The girls' smiles widened. "A job notice," Emmeline said, waving the paper. "Posted at the general store this morning. A rancher looking for help. Good pay. Room and board included." Clara's heart did something painful in her chest. A job. A real job. Not just working for scraps at the boarding house. Room and board meant a space of her own, meant not having to endure breakfast performances and midnight whispers about how much space she took up. "Why are you telling me?" "Because we want to help you, silly girl," Grace said, and the sweetness in her voice was poison. "You're always saying how hard you work, how much you do around here. Well, here's your chance to get a real position. Make something of yourself." Clara reached for the paper. Emmeline pulled it back, just out of reach. "There's a catch, though," she said. "The rancher is Wade Mercer." The name hit like cold water. Everyone in Black Hollow knew Wade Mercer. The Iron Rancher, they called him, though never to his face. A massive man who ran the biggest spread in the territory through sheer force of will and fury. He went through workers the way normal men went through coffee, quickly and without much thought. People said he'd broken a man's jaw once for talking back. Said he worked from dawn until midnight and expected everyone around him to do the same. Said his ranch was where hope went to die. "You're scared to go yourselves," Clara said quietly. The girls' faces hardened. "We're not scared of anything," Emmeline snapped. "We just thought you might want the opportunity, but if you're going to be ungrateful, I'll go." The words came out before Clara fully realized she was going to say them. But once they were out, she didn't take them back. She had nothing here. Less than nothing. She had contempt and scraps in an attic corner that smelled like mildew. Whatever Wade Mercer was, however violent or harsh, he was offering pay. Room and board. A chance to be something other than the town's favorite joke. The girls stared at her. They'd expected her to refuse, to cower. "You'll go?" Grace repeated. "Yes." Emmeline recovered first. She shoved the paper at Clara with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Fine. Good. You can take the supply wagon tomorrow morning. Johnny makes a delivery run past the Mercer Ranch. I'm sure he won't mind dropping you off." "I'm sure," Clara said. She took the paper and walked away before they could see her hands shaking. That night, Clara packed everything she owned into a canvas bag that had come with her to the boarding house 5 years ago. It didn't take long. 2 dresses, both faded, a spare set of undergarments, a hairbrush with half the bristles missing, a small wooden horse her father had carved before he died, one of the only things she had left of the life before. The other girls pretended not to watch, but Clara felt their eyes tracking her movements. "You really going through with this?" asked Beth, the youngest at 15. She wasn't cruel like the others, just scared of becoming the new target if she showed Clara any kindness. "I am." "He's going to send you back." Maybe? And then what?" Clara tied the bag closed and sat on the edge of her thin mattress. "Then I'll figure something else out." She didn't sleep that night, just lay in the darkness listening to the other girls breathe and thought about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. Wade Mercer could laugh at her, could take one look at her size, her stutter, her obvious inadequacy, and send her away without a word, could be every bit as brutal as the stories claimed. But he could also be her way out. And for that chance, Clara thought she could endure just about anything. Johnny Ferris drove the supply wagon and didn't ask questions, which made him Clara's favorite person in Black Hollow by default. He just nodded when she climbed up beside him at dawn, her bag clutched in her lap, and clicked his tongue to get the horses moving. They rode in silence for the first hour. The town fell away behind them, replaced by rolling grassland that stretched toward mountains still capped with snow. The air smelled clean out here, away from the boarding house's perpetual odor of boiled cabbage and unwashed bodies. "You know what you're getting into?" Johnny asked, finally. Clara had been watching a hawk circle overhead. She looked at him. He was older, maybe 40, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. "No." He nodded like this was the answer he'd expected. "Wade Mercer's not a bad man, but he's a hard man. Lost his wife and baby daughter 6 years back. Fever took them both in the same week. Changed him. He was always serious, always focused, but after that..." Johnny shook his head. "After that, he just stopped caring about anything except the ranch. Stopped talking to people unless he had to. Stopped coming into town at all. Why does he need help now? Because even Wade Mercer can't run a spread that size alone. He tries, works himself near to death trying, but there's only so much one man can do. He puts up notices a few times a year, usually gets someone desperate enough to try it. They never last. How long? Record's 4 days. Most don't make it past 2. Clara processed this. What happens to them? He runs them off mostly, works them so hard they quit or get so angry they leave on their own. Wade's got a temper like summer lightning, comes out of nowhere and burns hot. Johnny glanced at her. "You sure about this?" "No," Clara thought. But she said, "Yes." They rode on. The sun climbed higher, turning the cool morning into a warm afternoon. Clara's dress stuck to her back with sweat. She drank from the canteen Johnny offered and tried not to think about how far they were from town now, how impossible the walk back would be if this went wrong. The Mercer Ranch appeared in the distance around mid-afternoon. It wasn't what Clara had expected. The main house was large, 2 stories of weathered wood that had probably been painted white once but had faded to gray. The barn beside it was massive, big enough for dozens of horses and cattle. Corrals stretched out in neat lines, though only a few held livestock. Beyond that, fields rolled away toward distant tree lines. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it looked abandoned. The fences sagged, weeds choked the pathways. One of the corral gates hung crooked on broken hinges. The house windows stared blank and dark, like eyes that had stopped seeing years ago. "Jesus," Johnny muttered. "It's gotten worse." He pulled the wagon up to the main house and set the brake. Clara sat frozen, her bag clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "You want me to wait?" Johnny asked quietly. She shook her head. If she was going to do this, she had to do it completely. No safety net. "All right then." He helped her down, his grip steady and warm. "Good luck, Miss Clara." She watched him drive away until the wagon disappeared behind a rise in the land. Then she turned and looked at the house. The door opened before she could knock. Wade Mercer filled the doorway. He was bigger than she'd imagined, 6.5 feet tall, at least, with shoulders that seemed too wide for the frame. His face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, prominent nose, deep-set eyes that looked black in the shadows of the porch. His hair was dark and overlong, touching his collar. He wore work clothes that had seen better days, canvas pants and a shirt with the sleeves rolled up over forearms roped with muscle. He stared at her. She stared back. "You lost?" His voice was deep, rough from disuse. No. I'm here about the job." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. "The job?" "Yes." He looked her up and down, not bothering to hide his assessment. Clara felt her face heat, but she didn't look away. She'd endured worse examinations than this. "You got any experience with ranch work?" "No." "Can you handle livestock?" "I can learn." "Can you muck stalls, mend fences, haul feed, work from sunup to sundown without complaining?" "Yes." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Who sent you?" The question caught her off guard. "What? This is a joke, isn't it? Someone in town sent you up here to—" He stopped, shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Go home." He started to close the door. I don't have a home." The words came out louder than she'd intended, sharp with desperation. Wade stopped. "I don't have a home," Clara repeated, quieter now. "I have a corner in an attic and scraps from a table where everyone hates me. I have nothing. So if this is a J joke, it's not mine. But I still need this job." She was shaking. She couldn't make herself stop. Wade looked at her, really looked at her, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or understanding of a kind she hadn't expected. "You won't last," he said finally. "Maybe not. I work hard. I work long. I don't slow down for anyone. I'm not asking you to." Another long silence. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. The wind moved through the grass with a sound like water. "All right," Wade said. He pulled the door open wider. "But when you quit, and you will quit, you don't get to come crying to me about it. Understand?" Clara nodded. Can't hear a nod. "I understand." "Good." He stepped back. "There's a room off the kitchen. Nothing fancy, but it's got a bed and a window. You can put your things there. Work starts at dawn." Clara climbed the porch steps on legs that felt like they'd carried her 1,000 miles instead of just across the yard. She passed close enough to Wade to smell him, sweat and leather, and something else. Something almost like cedar. The inside of the house was dim and dusty. Furniture sat covered in sheets like ghosts. The kitchen was cleaner but still showed signs of neglect. Dishes stacked in the sink, a floor that needed sweeping. The room he'd mentioned was small, barely bigger than a closet, but it had a real bed with a real mattress and a window that looked out toward the mountains, and a door that closed. A door that closed. Clara set her bag on the bed and sat down beside it. The mattress didn't sag under her weight. The room smelled like disuse, but not rot. Through the wall, she could hear Wade moving around in the kitchen, the heavy tread of his boots on the floorboards. She'd made it. She was here. Now she just had to survive. Dawn came cold and gray. Clara woke to someone pounding on her door hard enough to rattle the frame. "Up!" Wade's voice barked. Daylight's wasting. She dressed quickly in the same clothes she'd worn yesterday. She'd need to wash the other dress, find out if there was somewhere to do laundry, and stumbled out into the kitchen. Wade was already dressed and clearly impatient. He shoved a tin cup of coffee at her. Drink it fast. We've got work. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint and tasted like it had been sitting on the stove since yesterday. Clara drank it anyway, burning her tongue. Wade led her outside into air so cold it hurt to breathe. The sun was just starting to think about rising, painting the eastern sky pale gray. Barn first, he said, walking fast enough that Clara had to half jog to keep up. Horses need feeding and watering. Stalls need mucking. You know what mucking means? Cleaning. Cleaning shit, horse shit, cow shit, all kinds of shit. You gonna have a problem with that? No. He glanced back at her, skeptical, but didn't argue. The barn was worse than the house. The smell hit Clara like a physical force, manure and old hay and standing water. The stalls were filthy, some so bad she couldn't see the floor. Broken tools lay scattered in corners. The hayloft above looked like it might collapse at any moment. Wade grabbed a pitchfork and shoved it at her. Start here. Fork out the dirty hay, put it in the wheelbarrow, dump it on the manure pile out back. Then put down fresh bedding. Any questions? About 1,000, Clara thought. But she said, no. Good. He left her there. Clara stood in the doorway of the first stall and looked at the mountain of soiled hay and manure. Her stomach turned. The fork felt heavy and awkward in her hands. She had no idea how to even start. But she'd told Wade she could do this. Told him she wouldn't complain. So she drove the fork into the mess and started working. It was horrible. The smell made her gag. The work was harder than anything she'd done at the boarding house, and that was saying something. Her arms screamed after the first wheelbarrow load. Her back joined in after the second. By the time she'd cleaned one stall, her hands had blistered and her dress was soaked with sweat despite the cold. Wade appeared in the barn doorway. He looked at the one clean stall, then at Clara, then at the dozen stalls still waiting. You hurt? Clara straightened. Her hands were bleeding around the blisters, but she said, no. Then keep working. He disappeared again. Clara wanted to cry, wanted to throw down the pitchfork and walk away and never look back. Her body hurt in ways she didn't have names for. The boarding house girls had been right. This was impossible. She was going to fail. But she picked up this fork anyway. Because failing meant going back. And going back meant surrendering to a life where she would always be the joke, always be the target, always be less than human in everyone's eyes. So she cleaned another stall, and then another. She worked until the light through the barn door went from gray to gold to white, until her vision started to blur and her legs shook with every step, until she couldn't remember what it felt like to not hurt. Wade came back around what must have been noon, though Clara had lost track of time. Stop, he said. Clara blinked at him. She was standing in the sixth stall, the fork raised halfway through a scoop. I said, stop. You're going to kill yourself. He grabbed the fork from her hands. Come on, food. She followed him back to the house in a daze. He shoved her into a chair at the kitchen table and put bread and cheese in front of her. Eat. Clara's hands were shaking too badly to hold the bread. Wade saw, cursed under his breath, and cut it into pieces she could manage. They ate in silence. You'll quit after today, Wade said finally. Clara looked up. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. No, I won't. You can barely move. I'll move tomorrow. Why? The question came out harsh. Why the hell are you doing this? You don't know anything about ranch work. You're not built for this kind of labor. And I sure as hell ain't paying enough to make this worth destroying yourself. Because it's better than where I was. The truth sat between them, simple and undeniable. Wade shook his head. You're crazy. Maybe. He stood, taking his plate to the sink. You've got an hour to rest. Then we're fixing the fence in the south pasture. That's where I keep the breeding stock. And if they get out, we're both screwed. He walked out without waiting for a response. Clara sat at the table and looked at her ruined hands. She should quit. Any sane person would quit. But she thought about the room with the door that closed. About the coffee that was terrible but hot. About the way Wade had cut her bread without commenting on her weakness. She thought about Emmeline and Grace and Mrs. Calloway, all waiting for her to come crawling back. An hour later, when Wade came to get her, Clara was standing outside waiting. He stopped short. Thought you'd be smart enough to run. Not yet. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. All right then, let's go. The days blurred together. Clara learned the rhythm of the ranch. Early mornings feeding livestock, mid-mornings mucking stalls and mending equipment, afternoons working on whatever crisis had emerged that day. Broken fences, sick cattle, collapsed sections of the barn roof. The work never ended. Wade drove himself like a man possessed, and he expected Clara to keep up. He didn't make allowances for her size, her inexperience, or her gender. When he told her to haul a 100-pound feed sack, she hauled it, or she figured out how to haul it. When he told her to climb into the hayloft to check for rot, she climbed. She failed constantly. Her fence mending collapsed the first time cattle leaned against it. Her knot tying was so bad Wade had to redo every rope she touched. She spooked the horses, scattered the chickens, and once nearly set the barn on fire trying to fix a lantern. Wade yelled at her for every mistake. His voice could strip paint when he got going, and he got going a lot. He called her clumsy, slow, useless. He told her she had the grace of a drunk bear and the common sense of a fence post, but he never told her to leave. And slowly, incrementally, Clara started to improve. Her hands calloused over. Her muscles stopped screaming and started just aching. She learned to read the horses' moods, to approach the cattle without spooking them. Her fence mending held. Her knots stopped coming undone. The ranch started to change, too. The barn gradually became cleaner. The corrals got repaired, one section at a time. Clara discovered that she was good at organizing. She sorted the chaos of Wade's tool collection, established a system for the tack room, even got the chicken coop running smoothly again. Wade noticed. He didn't say anything, but Clara would find gloves left on her bed before particularly hard work. A jar of salve for her blistered hands appeared in the bathroom. The coffee got slightly less terrible, like maybe he'd actually bought fresh beans, small things, but they mattered. Between both suck. The first time someone from town came to the ranch, Clara was in the yard hauling water from the well. She heard the horse before she saw it, expensive tack jingling, hooves moving with the precision of an animal trained for showing, not working. Marcus Holbrook rode into the yard like he owned it. He was the kind of man who thought money made him important, well-dressed, well-fed, sitting on a horse worth more than Clara would make in a year. He looked at her the way people always looked at her, like she was something unfortunate that had gotten in his line of sight. "You the help," he called. Clara set down the water bucket. "Yes." "Tell Mercer that Marcus Holbrook wants to talk to him about selling his south acreage. I'm prepared to make a generous offer." Before Clara could respond, Wade appeared from the barn. He took one look at Holbrook, and his expression went dark. "Not interested." "Now, Wade, you haven't even heard my offer." "Don't need to. That land's not for sale." Holbrook's smile was condescending. "Come on, Mercer. You can barely work the land you've got. Sell me the section you're not using. Make some actual money for once. Get off my property." The temperature in the yard dropped about 20 degrees. Holbrook's smile faltered. "There's no need to be hostile." "There's every need. You show up on my land, insult my operation, and think I'm going to smile and play nice? Get out." Holbrook's face flushed red. His eyes cut to Clara. "This is about her, isn't it? Jesus, Wade, I heard rumors, but I didn't believe them. You've actually got the fat girl from Callaway's working here. What, you feeling charitable, or is she—" Wade moved faster than Clara had ever seen him move. One second he was standing by the barn. The next he had Holbrook's horse by the bridle, close enough that the rancher had to lean back to avoid Wade's reach. "Finish that sentence," Wade said quietly, "and they'll be finding pieces of you in 3 different counties." Silence. Holbrook swallowed hard. "You're insane." "Maybe, but I'm insane on my own land, which you're currently trespassing on. So ride out of here while you still can, and don't come back." He released the bridle. Holbrook didn't need to be told twice. He wheeled his horse around and rode off fast enough to kick up dust. Wade stood there until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then he turned and walked back toward the barn without looking at Clara. She stood by the water bucket, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. He'd defended her. Nobody had ever defended her before. That night, Clara made dinner for the first time. Wade usually handled it. Basic stuff, beans and bread and whatever meat he'd salted or dried. But Clara had been watching, and she'd noticed the kitchen had more supplies than he was using. She made stew, real stew, with vegetables and herbs she found growing wild near the creek. It wasn't fancy, but it was better than beans. Wade came in from the evening chores, stopped in the doorway, and stared. "What's this?" Dinner." He sat down slowly, like he expected the chair to disappear. Clara served him a bowl and waited. Wade took a bite. His expression didn't change, but he took another bite. And another. He finished the entire bowl without speaking. "It's good," he said finally. "Thank you." "You didn't have to." "I know." He looked at her across the table. In the lamplight, his face was softer somehow, less like carved stone and more like an actual person. "Why'd you really come here, Clara?" She'd been expecting this question for weeks, but now that it had arrived, she found she didn't have a clean answer. "Because I was tired," she said finally. "Tired of being the joke, tired of taking up space that nobody wanted me to fill. Tired of waking up every day knowing it would be exactly like the last one." She met his eyes. "The girls at the boarding house sent me here because they thought you'd break me. Thought it would be funny. But the thing is, I was already broken, so I figured why not?" Wade was quiet for a long time. "I lost my wife," he said, "and my daughter. Sarah was 3 years old. She had curly hair, and she laughed at everything." His voice was rough, like the words were cutting his throat on the way out. "After they died, I tried to hold it together. Tried to be the man I was before. But it was like the person I'd been died with them. All that was left was this." He gestured at himself. "Anger and work and nothing else." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Point is, I know what it's like. Feeling broken. Feeling like you're just going through motions because you don't know what else to do." He stood, taking his bowl to the sink. "You're tougher than you look, Clara Whitmore." He left the kitchen before she could respond. Clara sat alone at the table and felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest, something that might have been hope. The weeks turned into a month, then 2. Clara stopped counting the days she'd lasted, stopped waiting for Wade to send her away. The work was still brutal, but it was also becoming routine. She knew which horses liked her and which merely tolerated her, knew which fence sections were temperamental and needed extra attention, knew that Wade took his coffee black and his criticism direct, but that underneath all that anger was something else, something almost like kindness. They developed a rhythm. Wade handled the heavy work and the livestock management. Clara handled organization, cooking, and increasingly the day-to-day maintenance that kept the ranch functional. They worked in a silence that gradually became comfortable instead of tense, and the ranch kept improving. The barn was clean now, properly organized. The corrals were all repaired. Clara had even managed to get the vegetable garden producing again, mostly through sheer stubbornness and a refusal to let the weeds win. People from town started noticing. Riders passing by would slow down, staring at the transformed ranch with confusion. The place that had been slowly dying for 6 years was suddenly alive again. Clean, functional, almost thriving, and they all saw Clara working there. The rumors started small. Just whispers that Wade Mercer had actually kept a worker for more than a week. Then bigger whispers. He'd kept the fat girl from Calloway's. The one everyone thought was useless. Then the cruel ones. What was he getting out of the arrangement? What was she doing to make him keep her around? Clara heard the talk on her rare trips into town for supplies. She'd walk into the general store and conversations would stop. Women would stare, men would smirk. She stopped going when she could. But Wade noticed anyway. "Something happened in town?" he asked one evening after she'd come back tight-lipped and quiet. "Nothing new." Clara. She was washing dishes. She kept washing them, focusing on the rhythm of it. "They talk. It doesn't matter." "What do they say?" "Does it matter?" "It matters if it's bothering you." Clara set down the dish and turned to face him. Wade was standing in the doorway, filling it like he always did. His expression was dark. "They think that we're..." She stopped. Tried again. "They think there must be something else going on. Because why else would you keep me here?" Wade's jaw tightened. Because you work harder than any person I've ever known. Because you turned this place around. Because you're... He stopped, shook his head. What they think doesn't matter. Easy for you to say. You don't have to hear it. You're right, I don't. But I do have to hear what I think, and what I think is that you're the best thing that's happened to this ranch in 6 years. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides. You hear me? The best thing. Not because of anything improper. Because you showed up when I'd given up, and you didn't quit even when I gave you every reason to. Clara stared at him. Her heart was doing that complicated thing again. I'm not sending you away, Wade said quietly. Ever. So if the town wants to talk, let them talk. Long as you're willing to stay, you've got a place here. He left before Clara could find her voice. She stood in the kitchen alone and felt the hope in her chest grow into something bigger. Something that felt dangerously close to happiness. And for the first time in her entire life, Clara Whitmore felt like she belonged somewhere. The realization terrified her, because now she had something to lose. The storm that changed everything started building 3 days before it hit. Clara noticed it first in the way the cattle moved, restless, clustering together near the barn instead of spreading out to graze. The horses were skittish too, ears swiveling at sounds that weren't there. Even the chickens seemed agitated, clucking and pacing in their coop like they had somewhere important to be. Wade saw it too. He stood at the kitchen window that morning, coffee cup in hand, staring at the western sky. Bad one coming, he said. Clara joined him at the window. The horizon looked normal to her, blue sky, a few scattered clouds. But Wade had lived here his whole life. He knew things she was still learning. How bad? Bad enough to matter. He drained his coffee. We need to get everything secured. The south fence is still weak in places. If the wind hits it right, the whole section could come down. And the hay in the upper barn needs to be moved before it gets wet. Wet hay moldy hay makes the livestock sick. What do you need me to do? Wade looked at her. Something passed across his face. Surprise, maybe, that she hadn't argued or complained. Help me move the hay. That's priority. Then we'll tackle the fence. They worked all morning. The hay bales were heavy, each one a compact rectangle of dried grass that weighed more than Clara and fought her every step of the way. Wade hauled 2 at a time, muscles straining under his shirt. Clara managed 1, barely, dragging it more than carrying it. By noon, her back was screaming. By mid-afternoon, she'd stopped feeling her arms entirely. They'd become distant things attached to her shoulders, moving through will alone. Wade finally called a halt when the sun started dropping toward the horizon. That's enough for today. We'll finish tomorrow. Clara nodded, too exhausted to speak. They walked back to the house in silence. The wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. Inside, Clara made dinner while Wade checked his weather-predicting setup. A series of instruments he'd cobbled together over the years. Barometer, thermometer, wind gauge made from cups, and a broomstick. Pressure's dropping fast, he said, tapping the barometer. We've got maybe 36 hours before it hits. They ate quickly. Clara's stew again, though neither of them tasted it much. The air had that electric quality that comes before big weather, like the world was holding its breath. After dinner, Wade went out to do a final check of the livestock. Clara cleaned up and then stood at the window watching dark clouds build in the west. They looked angry, roiling, and churning like something alive. She was still standing there when Wade came back in, slamming the door against a gust of wind. It's moving faster than I thought, he said. We need to finish the hay tonight. Clara turned from the window. Tonight? Can't risk waiting. If this storm is as bad as I think, we'll be lucky to keep the barn roof on, much less worry about moving bales. He was already heading for his coat. You don't have to come. This is going to be rough. But Clara was already reaching for her own coat. I'm coming. They worked by lantern light, racing against the approaching storm. The wind kept getting stronger, whipping Clara's hair across her face and making the barn creak ominously. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees since sunset, and her fingers went numb inside her gloves. Wade worked like a machine, his movements efficient and relentless. Clara tried to match his pace, but couldn't. She fell behind, her exhausted muscles refusing to cooperate. A bale slipped from her grip and broke open, scattering hay across the barn floor. Damn it, she muttered, dropping to her knees to gather it up. Leave it, Wade called. We don't have time. But Clara's hands were already moving, scooping the loose hay. She'd made the mess. She'd clean it up. Wade appeared beside her. Clara, leave it. I can fix it. It's just, hey, come on. He pulled her to her feet, his hands warm even through both their gloves. For a moment they stood too close, close enough that Clara could see gold flecks in his dark eyes, close enough to feel the heat coming off his body. Then Wade stepped back, and the moment broke. They finished the hay just as the first drops of rain started falling. Big, heavy drops that hit the barn roof like bullets. Wade secured the barn doors and they ran for the house, getting soaked in the 30 seconds it took to cross the yard. Inside, Clara stood dripping on the kitchen floor while Wade lit lamps. The wind was howling now, rattling the windows. "Get changed," Wade said. "I'll make coffee." Clara's room felt like a sanctuary. She peeled off her wet clothes and changed into her other dress, the one that was somehow even more worn than the first. Her hands were shaking, from cold or exhaustion, or both. When she came back to the kitchen, Wade had coffee waiting and a fire going in the stove. He'd changed too, into dry work clothes that were only slightly less battered than what he'd been wearing. They sat at the table and listened to the storm build. The wind screamed around the house. Rain hammered the roof. Somewhere outside, something metal was banging against something else. "This house has been through worse," Wade said, like he could read her nervousness. "Built it myself 12 years ago. She'll hold." "You built this?" "Me and my father. He died before we finished the second floor, but yeah, every nail, every board." Wade stared into his coffee. "Sarah used to play on this floor. She'd build towers with wooden blocks and knock them down over and over. Thought it was the funniest thing in the world." It was the first time he'd mentioned his daughter by name since that night weeks ago. Clara held very still, afraid to break whatever had made him willing to talk. "She looked like her mother," Wade continued. "Same blonde hair, same blue eyes, but she had my stubbornness. If she wanted something, she'd keep at it until she got it, or until we distracted her with something else." He smiled, but it was painful to see. "Emma, my wife, she was better at the distracting. I was always the one who'd just give in." "They would have been proud of you," Clara said quietly, keeping this place going. Wade's laugh was bitter. "Would they? I damn near let it fall apart. Spent 6 years working myself half to death, but not actually accomplishing anything. The ranch was dying, and I was too angry to see it." He looked at her. "Then you showed up." "I didn't do anything special." "You did everything special. You took a place that was falling down and made it functional again. You took a man who'd forgotten what it meant to have someone around and—" He stopped, shook his head. "Point is, things are better now, and that's because of you." Clara's throat was too tight to speak. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something else was building, something just as powerful and twice as dangerous. Wade stood abruptly. "I should check the barn, make sure nothing's leaking." "In this weather?" "Won't take long." He was out the door before Clara could argue, disappearing into the screaming dark. She sat at the table and stared at her coffee and tried not to think about the way he'd looked at her, the way she'd wanted him to keep looking. This was dangerous territory. She was his employee. He was her employer. And more than that, he was still grieving, still broken in ways that Clara understood too well. Whatever this was between them, if it was anything at all, it couldn't happen. Except she wanted it to happen. The realization hit her like cold water. She wanted Wade Mercer, wanted his rough hands and his rare smiles and the way he'd stood between her and Marcus Holbrook. Wanted the safety she felt on this ranch, the belonging, the sense that she mattered to someone. She wanted all of it, and that terrified her more than any storm. Wade came back 20 minutes later, soaked again and swearing. "South corner of the barn is leaking. I patched it best I could, but we'll need to fix the roof once this blows over." He stripped off his coat and hung it by the door. "How's the house holding up?" "Fine. Solid." "Good." He poured himself more coffee, added a generous slug of whiskey from a bottle Clara hadn't known he had. He saw her looking and held out the bottle. "Want some?" She shook her head. Wade shrugged and took a long drink of his spiked coffee. "Helps with the cold." They sat in silence while the storm continued its assault. Clara should have gone to bed, should have retreated to her small room and let Wade have his space. But she couldn't make herself move. "Why did you really defend me?" she asked finally. "With Holbrook. You could have just let him say whatever he wanted." Wade was quiet for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because I know what it's like. Being talked about like you're not even human. After Emma and Sarah died, people in town looked at me like I was dangerous, like grief had turned me into something that might explode at any moment. He stared into his cup. They weren't entirely wrong, but it still hurt, being treated like a thing instead of a person. So you knew how it felt. Yeah, and I wasn't about to let Holbrook do that to you. Not on my land, not anywhere. He looked up at her. You deserve better than that, Clara. Better than how this whole damn town treats you. Clara's eyes burned. She blinked hard, refusing to cry. Thank you. Don't thank me for basic human decency. But it wasn't basic. Not to Clara. Basic human decency had been in short supply for most of her life. What Wade had done, standing up for her, defending her, seeing her as a person worth defending, that was extraordinary. A particularly violent gust of wind hit the house, making the walls shudder. Something crashed outside, the sound barely audible over the storm's roar. Wade was on his feet instantly. That was close, too close. He grabbed a lantern and headed for the door. Clara followed without thinking, pulling her still damp coat back on. Stay inside, Wade ordered. Not a chance. He looked like he wanted to argue, but another crash made the decision for him. They plunged out into the storm together. The wind nearly knocked Clara off her feet. Rain lashed her face hard enough to sting. She could barely see 3 feet in front of her, could barely breathe through the wall of water. Wade grabbed her hand, his grip iron tight, and pulled her toward the barn. The lantern swung wildly, casting crazy shadows. They found the damage halfway there. The old oak tree at the edge of the property, the one Wade had mentioned was dying but hadn't gotten around to cutting down, had split. One massive branch had come down on the chicken coop, smashing through the roof. Hell! Wade shouted over the wind. The chickens! Clara was already moving. She reached the coop first, pulling at the broken boards. The chickens inside were going insane, squawking and flapping in panic. Careful, Wade yelled, appearing beside her. The whole thing could collapse. But Clara had already torn away enough boards to reach inside. She grabbed chickens by the handful, stuffing them inside her coat. They scratched and pecked, terrified, but she held on. Wade did the same, working methodically despite the storm. Together they rescued every bird they could find, 17 in total, and carried them to the barn through wind that tried to steal them away. Inside the barn was marginally better. The horses were agitated, stamping and snorting, but the structure was holding. Wade found an empty stall and they released the chickens into it. The birds immediately huddled together in one corner, still terrified, but alive. Clara stood there dripping and bleeding from a dozen chicken scratches and started laughing. Wade stared at her. You're bleeding. I know. She couldn't stop laughing. We just rescued chickens. In a hurricane. It's not a hurricane. Close enough. Clara wiped rain from her face. This is insane. We're insane. Wade's mouth twitched. Then he was laughing too, a sound Clara had never heard from him before. It was rusty and unpracticed, but real. Yeah, he said, we're definitely insane. They stood in the barn while the storm raged outside, laughing like fools. Clara's coat was full of feathers and chicken shit. Wade's shirt was torn. They were both soaked to the bone and covered in scratches, and Clara had never felt more alive. Wade's laughter faded first. He looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't read, something intense and almost frightened. We should get back to the house, he said. The walk back was slower. The storm was weakening slightly, the wind dying down from catastrophic to merely terrible. Clara's adrenaline was fading too, leaving behind exhaustion so complete she could barely lift her feet. She stumbled on the porch steps. Wade caught her, one arm wrapping around her waist to steady her. Clara grabbed his shoulder for balance. And suddenly they were pressed together, both breathing hard, both soaked and shaking. Wade's arm was still around her waist. Clara's hand was still on his shoulder. Neither of them moved. Clara, Wade said, and his voice was rough in a way that had nothing to do with the storm. She knew she should step back, should put distance between them before this became something neither of them could take back. But she couldn't make herself move, couldn't make herself want to. We should go inside, she whispered. Wade nodded, but his arm didn't move from her waist. The barn door slammed in the wind, a sharp crack that broke the moment. Wade released her abruptly and stepped back. Yeah, inside, you're freezing. They went into the house. Wade built up the fire while Clara changed again, into her nightgown this time, because both her dresses were completely ruined. She came back to the kitchen wrapped in a blanket, her wet hair hanging loose down her back. Wade had changed too. He handed her hot coffee without meeting her eyes. You should sleep. It's late. What about you? I'll keep watch. Make sure nothing else tries to fall on us. Clara wanted to argue, but she was too tired. She took her coffee to her room and climbed into bed, still wrapped in the blanket. Outside, the storm continued, but it sounded farther away now. She lay in the darkness and thought about Wade's arm around her waist, the way he'd said her name, the moment on the porch when everything had hung in balance. Something had changed between them tonight, something fundamental. Clara didn't know what came next, didn't know if Wade felt even a fraction of what she was feeling, but she knew she wasn't the same person who'd arrived at this ranch 3 months ago. That Clara had been broken, defeated, ready to accept whatever scraps of existence the world threw her way. This Clara wanted more, and that was the most dangerous thing of all. The storm blew itself out by morning. Clara woke to silence so complete it felt unnatural after the night's violence. She dressed in her least destroyed dress and went to the kitchen. Wade was asleep at the table, his head pillowed on his arms. He'd kept watch all night like he'd said he would. Clara stood in the doorway and looked at him, at the exhaustion carved into his face, even in sleep. She made coffee as quietly as she could. Wade stirred when the smell reached him, lifting his head with a groan. Morning, Clara said. Morning. His voice was gravel. Storm's over. I heard, or didn't hear, I guess. Wade stood, his spine crackling. He moved to the window and looked out. Damage assessment time. You up for it? Always. They walked the property together in the weak morning light. The chicken coop was a total loss, crushed beyond repair. Several fence sections had collapsed. The oak tree had split almost in half, and smaller branches littered the ground everywhere. But the barn had held. The house had held. And aside from some minor flooding in the low pasture, the ranch had survived. Could have been worse, Wade said, standing in the wreckage of the chicken coop. Could have been better. True. He kicked at a broken board. We'll need to build a new coop, reinforce it this time, make it storm-proof. And that oak needs to come down completely before the next wind knocks the rest of it over. The fences, too. Yeah, fences, too. Wade looked at her. You know we can't do all this in a day, right? It's going to take weeks. Clara smiled. Good thing I'm not going anywhere. Something shifted in Wade's expression. Good thing, he said quietly. They spent the day doing emergency repairs, the critical work that couldn't wait. Wade cut away the dangerous parts of the oak while Clara sorted through the coop debris, salvaging what board she could. The chickens stayed in their temporary stall, still traumatized but safe. By afternoon, word had spread to town. Clara saw the riders coming from her position near the barn and called out to Wade. Company! Wade climbed down from the tree and stood beside her, wiping sweat from his forehead. 3 horses approached, carrying men Clara recognized. Samuel Torres, who owned the feed store. David Chen, who ran the lumber mill. And bringing up the rear, looking deeply uncomfortable, was Marcus Holbrook. Mercer, Torres called as they rode up. Heard you took a beating last night. Thought we'd come see if you needed any help. Wade's expression was carefully neutral. Appreciate it. We're managing. Looks like more than managing. Chen was surveying the damage with a professional eye. That oak came down, huh? Lucky it didn't hit the barn. Lucky, Wade agreed. There was an awkward pause. The men looked at Clara, then away, then at Wade, then at the ground. Finally, Holbrook cleared his throat. Look, Mercer, about the other day. You mean when you insulted me and my employee on my own land? Holbrook flushed. I was out of line. I apologize. Wade waited. Clara could feel the tension radiating off him. To both of you, Holbrook added, forcing the words out while looking somewhere over Clara's left shoulder. I was disrespectful, and I apologize. It wasn't much of an apology, but it was more than Clara had ever received before, and judging by Wade's slight nod, it was enough. We could use help clearing the oak, Wade said, if you're offering. The men dismounted. For the next several hours, they worked together, cutting, hauling, stacking. Clara stayed out of the way mostly, bringing water and dealing with the smaller debris. But she watched the men watching Wade, saw their grudging respect as he worked alongside them, and she saw them noticing the ranch. How clean it was now, how organized, how alive. Torres mentioned it first during a water break. Place looks good, Mercer. Better than it has in years. Clara's doing, Wade said simply. The men looked at her. Clara fought the urge to fidget under their scrutiny. Huh, Chen said. Then, after a moment, good work. It was the first compliment Clara had received from anyone in Black Hollow besides Wade. She didn't know what to do with it, so she just nodded. By the time they finished, the sun was setting. The oak was reduced to manageable pieces, stacked and waiting to be split for firewood. The immediate danger was gone. The men mounted their horses. Torres tipped his hat to Wade, then, and this felt monumental, to Clara as well. If you need anything else, you know where to find us. They rode off into the dusk. Wade and Clara stood in the yard and watched them go. That was strange, Clara said. Yeah. They were almost nice. I noticed. Clara looked up at him. Because of the ranch? Because it looks better? Wade shook his head. Because they're starting to see what I see. That you're not what they thought you were. He started walking toward the house. Come on, I'm starving. Dinner was quiet. We're both too tired for conversation. But it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes from shared work and mutual exhaustion. Clara was washing dishes when Wade spoke from the table behind her. I need to tell you something. Her hand stilled in the water. Something in his voice made her nervous. What? People in town are talking. About us. About you being here. Clara's stomach sank. I know. It's getting worse. Not just talk anymore. Some of the women have been complaining to Sheriff Morrison, saying it's not proper. A single woman living on a ranch with a single man, no chaperone, nope. He stopped. Morrison came by last week while you were in town, told me I was putting you in a bad position, told me people were questioning your virtue. Clara turned to face him, her wet hands dripping on the floor. What did you tell him? I told him to mind his own damn business, that you work here. Nothing improper is happening, and anyone who says different can take it up with me personally. Wade's jaw was tight. But he's right about one thing. This situation isn't sustainable. Eventually, the talk is going to turn into action, and then we'll both have problems. So what are you saying? That I need to leave? No. The word came out hard and fast. Hell no. But we need to figure something out. A solution that stops the gossip without you having to go anywhere. Clara's mind was racing. What kind of solution? Wade stood. He crossed the kitchen until he was standing in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to see his face. I think you know what kind. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Wade, marry me. The words hung between them, stark and impossible. You don't mean that. I do mean it. I've been thinking about it since the storm, since... He stopped. Started again. This ranch needs you. I need you. And if marriage is what it takes to shut up the town and keep you here, then that's what we'll do. That's not a reason to get married. It's practical. It's insane. Maybe. Wade's expression was intense. But I've lost enough people, Clara. I'm not losing you to gossip and small-minded idiots who can't see what's right in front of them. So yeah, marry me. Make it legal and proper and everything the town wants it to be. And then they can't touch you. Clara stared at him. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto this offer with both hands and never let go. But the practical part, the part that had learned not to trust good things, held her back. You're doing this to protect me. Yes. Not because you actually want... I want you to stay, Wade interrupted. However I can make that happen. If that means marriage, then fine. We're friends. We work well together. We could make it work. Friends. The word hurt more than Clara wanted to admit. I need to think about it. Wade nodded. He looked disappointed but not surprised. Take all the time you need. He left the kitchen. Clara stood alone with her hands still wet and her mind spinning in circles. Marriage to Wade Mercer. A real home. Legal protection from the town's judgment. Safety. But not love. At least not from his side. And Clara was realizing, slowly and painfully, that she wanted more than safety. She wanted what she'd felt on the porch during the storm. She wanted Wade to look at her the way he'd looked at her in that moment, like she was something precious instead of something useful. She wanted him to love her. But maybe that was asking too much. Maybe safety and friendship were enough. Maybe she should take what was offered and be grateful. Clara went to bed with the question unanswered. She lay in the darkness and listened to Wade moving around in the rest of the house, and tried to imagine what her life would look like if she said yes, what it would look like if she said no. Both futures terrified her equally. Clara didn't answer Wade for 3 days. She went about her work like normal, feeding the livestock, organizing the tack room, starting the rebuild on the chicken coop with salvaged lumber. Wade worked beside her in silence, patient in a way that made Clara's chest ache. He didn't push, didn't ask again, just waited. The problem was that Clara didn't know what she wanted her answer to be. At night, alone in her small room, she'd list the reasons to say yes. Security, a home, legal protection from the town's cruelty, the chance to keep doing work she'd grown to love on a ranch that felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived. Then she'd list the reasons to say no. Marriage should be about more than practicality. Wade was offering her a business arrangement, not a life partnership. He'd never touched her except by accident, never looked at her like she was anything more than a competent worker he wanted to keep around. And Clara had realized somewhere in the chaos of that storm that she wanted more. She wanted him to want her, not her labor. Her. But wanting things had never worked out well for Clara Whitmore. So maybe she should just take what was offered and stop asking for the impossible. On the 4th day, Mrs. Calloway showed up. Clara was in the new chicken coop, mostly framed now, just needed a roof, when she heard the wagon. She looked up to see the familiar rig from the boarding house rolling into the yard, Marjorie Calloway handling the reins with the same severe competence she brought to everything. Clara's stomach dropped. She climbed out of the half-built coop and wiped sawdust from her hands, watching as Mrs. Calloway set the brake and climbed down without waiting for help. Wade appeared from the barn, his expression going dark the moment he recognized their visitor. "Mrs. Calloway," he said, his voice flat. "What brings you out here?" "Mr. Mercer." Marjorie's eyes swept over the ranch, taking in the repairs, the organized yard, the general air of functionality. Something tightened in her face. "I'm here about Clara." "What about her?" "I'm taking her back." The words landed like stones. Clara felt her breath catch. Wade moved, positioning himself slightly in front of Clara. Not obviously, not aggressively, but enough. "Clara doesn't work for you anymore. She owes me 3 months' board and lodging from before she left, plus the cost of the bed space she occupied, the meals she consumed, and the inconvenience of her sudden departure." Marjorie pulled a piece of paper from her bag. "I have it all documented. $57 total." Clara's legs went weak. $57. She'd never seen that much money in her life, much less had it to spare. "That's robbery," Wade said. "You worked her like a slave and you know it. I provided room and board in exchange for light housework. If Clara chose to leave before settling her debts, that's her failing, not mine." Marjorie's smile was thin and cruel. "The sheriff agrees with me. He's prepared to enforce collection if necessary." "The hell he is." "I can pay," Clara heard herself say. Her voice sounded strange, distant. "I've been working here for months. I have wages saved." Wade turned to look at her. "Clara, no." "How much have you saved?" Marjorie asked, her eyes bright with malice. Clara's throat was too tight. She knew exactly how much she'd saved because she'd counted it obsessively, every week treasuring the growing pile of coins in the jar under her bed. $18. Not nearly enough. "Then I'll work it off. Come back to the boarding house until—" "No." Wade's voice cut through the air like a blade. "She's not going anywhere with you." Marjorie's eyebrows rose. "Are you refusing to let her settle a legitimate debt, Mr. Mercer? Because that would be quite illegal. I could have the sheriff here within the hour. The debt isn't legitimate. You're manufacturing charges to get her back under your roof where you can abuse her." Wade's hands were clenched at his sides. "I know exactly what kind of place you run, Mrs. Calloway. Everyone does. You take in girls with nowhere else to go and work them until they break, all while telling them they should be grateful for the privilege. How dare you? I'll pay the $57. Wade cut her off. "Right now, full amount. Then you get off my property and you don't come back." Marjorie's expression shifted, calculating. "Do you have that much on hand?" "I'll get it." Wade strode toward the house. Clara stood frozen in the yard with Marjorie, feeling like prey caught in a trap. "Well," Marjorie said after a moment, her voice conversational, "he's certainly protective of you, The whole town is talking about it, you know. What you must be doing to earn such devotion from the Iron Rancher." Clara's face burned. "I work. That's all I deduce." "Of course, dear. I'm sure that's what you tell yourself." Marjorie adjusted her gloves, deliberate and slow. "But we both know the truth. A man doesn't keep a woman like you around unless he's getting something out of it, and it's certainly not your looks or your charm." The words hit exactly where they were meant to. Clara felt them sink in like hooks, dragging up every insecurity she'd ever had. "The girls send their regards, by the way," Marjorie continued. "They think it's hilarious that you've trapped Wade Mercer into keeping you. They're running a pool on how long until he comes to his senses and throws you out. Emmeline has 2 weeks. Grace says less." "Stop. Why? Does the truth hurt?" Marjorie stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You know what you are, Clara. You've always known. You're the fat, stuttering girl nobody wanted, and playing at being a ranch hand won't change that. Sooner or later, Wade Mercer will see it too." Wade came back out of the house carrying a leather pouch. He counted out bills and coins into Marjorie's waiting hand, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. $57. "Count it." Marjorie did, taking her time. When she was satisfied, she tucked the money away and smiled. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mr. Mercer. Clara, if you ever want to come back to civilization, you know where to find me." She climbed into her wagon and drove away without looking back. Clara and Wade stood in the yard and watched her go. "You didn't have to do that," Clara said finally. Her voice came out small. "Yes, I did. I'll pay you back, all of it. I can work—" "Oh, Clara," Wade turned to face her. "Stop. You don't owe me anything, but $57 is nothing compared to what you've done for this place. For me." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "That woman is poison. I wasn't letting her take you." Clara's eyes were burning. She blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. "She's right, though, about what people are saying, about what I am. What you are is the hardest worker I've ever known, and the best thing that's happened to this ranch in 6 years. Don't let that bitter old woman convince you otherwise." But Marjorie's words had already taken root. Clara could feel them settling in, finding purchase in all the old wounds that had never fully healed. She was fooling herself, thinking she belonged here, thinking Wade saw her as anything more than a useful pair of hands. "I should get it back to work," she said, turning away. Wade caught her arm. "Clara, wait. Please don't." She couldn't look at him. If she looked at him, she'd break completely. "I just need to work." She pulled free and walked toward the chicken coop, her vision blurring. Behind her, Wade said something else, but Clara didn't hear it. She climbed into the half-built structure and picked up her hammer and focused on driving nails with hands that shook. Work had always been her refuge, the one thing she could control when everything else fell apart. So she worked and tried not to think about Marjorie's words, or the money Wade had spent, or the marriage proposal still hanging unanswered between them. That night, Clara stayed in her room instead of coming to dinner. She heard Wade moving around in the kitchen, heard him pause outside her door, heard him walk away again without knocking. She lay on her bed fully dressed and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what she was supposed to do. The answer came 2 days later, delivered by Sheriff Morrison himself. Clara was working on the south fence when she saw him riding up. Wade was in town buying supplies, which meant she was alone. The sheriff dismounted and walked over, his expression professionally neutral. "Miss Whitmore." "Sheriff?" Clara set down her hammer. "Wade's not here. Actually, I came to talk to you." Morrison pulled off his hat, turning it in his hands. "There's been some concern in town about your living situation." Clara's stomach sank. "What kind of concern?" "The kind where people think it's not proper for an unmarried woman to be living alone with an unmarried man. No chaperone, no oversight. It's creating talk. I'm an employee. I work here." "I understand that. And I've told folks as much. But the talk's getting louder, and some of the women in town are pushing for action. They think you're being taken advantage of, or that you're—" He stopped, uncomfortable. "Well, they think something improper is happening." "Nothing is happening. I believe you. Problem is, belief doesn't matter much when it comes to reputation, especially a woman's reputation." Morrison shifted his weight. "Look, I don't want to cause trouble, but I've been asked to convey a message. Either you find more appropriate lodging in town, or you and Mercer make this arrangement legal. Those are the options the town council is willing to accept. Clara felt cold despite the afternoon heat. And if we don't choose either option, then there'll be consequences. Could be legal ones, could be social ones. Either way, it won't be pleasant for either of you. He put his hat back on. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore, truly, but that's how it is. You've got until the end of the month to decide. He rode away, leaving Clara alone with the fence and a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. When Wade got back from town an hour later, Clara was sitting on the porch steps waiting for him. We need to talk, she said. Wade took one look at her face and nodded. He sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Morrison was here, Clara said. The town council gave us an ultimatum. I either move back to town or we get married. We have until the end of the month. Wade was quiet for a long moment. What do you want to do? I don't know. Clara pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. If I go back to town, where would I even stay? Can't afford my own place. Can't go back to Calloway's, and any respectable family would refuse to take me in because of the rumors. So that's not really an option. No. Then I guess the question is whether you can stand being married to me. Clara looked at him. Wade was staring out at the horizon, his profile hard and unreadable. Can you stand being married to me? She asked. I already told you. I want you to stay. That's not the same as wanting to marry me. Wade turned his head, meeting her eyes. No, it's not. But it's the truth I've got to offer. I like having you here. I respect your work. I think we could build a decent life together. Is that enough? Clara wanted to scream that no, it wasn't enough. That she wanted passion and love and all the things she'd been taught not to expect. But she was also practical enough to know that beggars couldn't be choosers, and she was very much a beggar in this situation. What would the marriage actually be? She asked. Would you expect... She stopped, her face heating. Would it be a real marriage? Understanding crossed Wade's face. That would be up to you. I'm not going to force anything you don't want. So we'd just be business partners who happen to share a name, if that's what you want. Clara stood abruptly, too agitated to sit still. What do you want, Wade? You keep asking what I want, but you never say what you want. Wade stood too, his movements careful. I want this ranch to keep functioning. I want you to be safe from town gossip. I want to stop having to explain to every visitor why there's a woman living here, and I want... He stopped. What? I want to stop being alone. The admission came out rough, like it hurt him to say it. I've been alone for 6 years, and then you showed up, and the house felt like a home again instead of a tomb. So yeah, I want you to stay. However that has to happen. The honesty in his voice cracked something in Clara's chest. This wasn't a declaration of love, but it was real, and it was vulnerable, and it was more than she'd expected. Okay, she heard herself say. Wade blinked. Okay? Yes, I'll marry you. The words hung between them. Wade's expression didn't change, but something in his posture relaxed slightly. You're sure? No, Clara thought. But she said, yes. All right then. Wade nodded once, sharp and decisive. I'll talk to Reverend Matthews tomorrow. We can do it simple, just the legal part. No big ceremony. That's fine. They stood there awkwardly. Two people who'd just agreed to get married and had no idea what to do next. I should start dinner, Clara said finally. Right, dinner. Good. She went inside. Wade stayed on the porch. Clara moved through the kitchen mechanically, pulling out ingredients without really seeing them. Her hands were shaking again. She was going to marry Wade Mercer. The reality of it hit her all at once. This wasn't a fantasy or a maybe someday dream. This was actually happening. In a matter of weeks, she'd be Clara Mercer, legally bound to a man who saw her as a competent employee and nothing more. It should have felt like victory, like safety, like everything she'd been desperately hoping for when she first arrived at this ranch. Instead, it felt like she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. But the alternative was worse. Going back to town meant going back to ridicule and loneliness and a life where she'd never be more than the town joke. At least here she had work and purpose and a man who treated her with basic respect. That had to be enough. Clara told herself that over and over while she made dinner. while she and Wade ate in uncomfortable silence. While she cleaned up and retreated to her room and lay awake staring at the ceiling, it had to be enough, because it was all she was going to get. Word spread through Black Hollow like wildfire. Clara discovered this when she went into town 3 days later for supplies. The moment she walked into the general store, conversation stopped. Every person in the building turned to stare at her. Mrs. Patterson, the store owner's wife, recovered first. Clara Whitmore, or should I say, soon to be Mrs. Mercer. Clara's face burned. News travels fast. In a town this size? Of course it does. Mrs. Patterson's smile was sharp. Quite a catch you've landed. Wade Mercer and all that land. You must be thrilled. The implication was clear. Clara had trapped Wade somehow, manipulated him into marriage. I need fence wire and nails, Clara said, refusing to engage. She gathered her supplies while whispers followed her around the store. Women clustered in corners, talking behind their hands. Men watched with expressions ranging from amusement to disgust. Clara paid and left as quickly as possible, her purchases heavy in her arms. She was loading them into the wagon when Emmeline and Grace appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. Well, well, Emmeline said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. If it isn't the future Mrs. Mercer. Clara didn't look at them. Move. I need to finish loading. How did you do it? Grace asked, circling around to block Clara's path. Seriously, we're dying to know. What could you possibly have that would make Wade Mercer want to marry you? Maybe she threatened to leave, Emmeline suggested, and he realized he'd actually have to do his own work again. Or maybe she's carrying his baby. That would certainly explain the rush. Clara's hands tightened on the fence wire until the metal bit into her palms. Get out of my way. Touchy, Grace said. You know, you might have won this round, Clara, but everyone knows this marriage is a joke. Give it 6 months before Wade realizes what a mistake he's made and sends you packing. 1 year, Emmeline countered. I'll bet you $1 he doesn't make it a year before he's looking for a way out. Something in Clara snapped. She'd spent her entire life taking abuse from these girls, accepting their cruelty because fighting back only made things worse. But she wasn't that person anymore. She'd hauled hay in storms and rescued chickens from collapsed coops and rebuilt an entire ranch from the ground up. She was done being their target. You're right, Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. This marriage is practical, not romantic. Wade needs help on the ranch, and I need a place to live. It's a business arrangement. The girl's smiles widened, sensing victory. But here's the thing, Clara continued. I don't care what you think anymore. I don't care what this whole town thinks. You can whisper and gossip all you want. I'll still wake up tomorrow on a ranch I helped save, working beside a man who respects me. And you'll wake up in that boarding house, serving breakfast to the same people you've been serving for years, going nowhere. She stepped forward. Emmeline and Grace actually moved back. So take your bets. Make your jokes. It doesn't touch me anymore because I'm done letting you define what I'm worth. Clara pushed past them and finished loading the wagon. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady. She climbed onto the bench, took up the reins, and drove away without looking back. It wasn't until she was halfway home that she started crying. Not from sadness, from rage and relief, and something that felt dangerously close to pride. She'd stood up for herself, finally. After 23 years of taking whatever the world threw at her, she'd finally pushed back. It felt incredible. It felt terrifying. By the time she got back to the ranch, her tears had dried and her hands were steady again. Wade was working on the new chicken coop roof. He looked up when the wagon rolled in, his eyes sharp. You all right? Yes. You don't look all right. Clara climbed down from the wagon. I ran into Emmeline and Grace in T-Town. They had things to say about our engagement. Wade's expression went dark. What kind of things? The usual. That I trapped you. That you'll realize your mistake soon enough. Clara started unloading supplies. I told them I didn't care what they thought. Good. Is it though? Clara set down a coil of fence wire and looked at him. Because they're right about one thing. This marriage is practical. We're not fooling anyone by pretending it's anything else. Wade climbed down from the roof. Did I ask you to pretend? No, but then don't. He grabbed a bag of nails from the wagon bed. Let them think whatever they want. We know the truth. That's all that matters. What is the truth? The question came out before Clara could stop it. Wade paused, the bag of nails hanging from one hand. The truth is, we're two people who work well together and decided to make it legal so the town would stop harassing us. That's it. That's it. Two words that somehow hurt more than Emmeline and Grace's mockery combined. Right, Clara said. Of course. She finished unloading the wagon in silence. Wade went back to the roof. They worked separately for the rest of the day, the distance between them feeling wider than the physical space. That night, Clara made chicken stew. Wade ate 3 bowls and complimented the seasoning. They talked about fence repairs and hay prices and whether the barn roof would last another winter. Safe topics, practical topics. Clara went to bed early, pleading exhaustion. She lay in her small room and stared at the wall and wondered if this was what the rest of her life would look like. Comfortable, respectful, empty of everything she actually wanted. She must have slept eventually because she woke to shouting. Clara bolted upright, her heart racing, Wade's voice, loud and angry, coming from somewhere outside. She grabbed her robe and ran for the door. The yard was lit by torchlight. Clara's stomach dropped. 5 men on horseback, faces she recognized from town. And standing in front of them, Wade, holding a rifle, but not quite pointing it. "Telling you to get off my land," Wade was saying, his voice deadly calm. "We're just here to talk some sense into you, Mercer," one of the men said. Clara recognized him as Joseph Grant, who owned the saloon. "Before you do something, you'll regret." "Like what? Getting married? Pretty sure that's my business." "It's the town's business when you're making a mockery of the institution of marriage. That girl is using you. Can't you see that? She's after your land, your money. I don't have any money. Your name, then. She wants respectability, and she's willing to trap you to get it." Wade's laugh was harsh. "You've got it backwards, Grant. I asked her. She's doing me a favor by saying yes." That stopped the men short. They looked at each other, confused. "Why would you want to marry her?" another man asked. "You could have your pick of women in this territory. Actual women, not—" Wade raised the rifle, not pointing it at anyone, but the threat was clear. "Finish that sentence and we're going to have a problem." Clara stepped off the porch. Every man's attention swung to her. She felt their judgment like a physical weight, but she walked forward anyway until she was standing beside Wade. "You should go," she said quietly. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." Grant's smile was cruel. "Listen to her, thinking she has any say here. You're not married yet, girl. You're just the help." "She's my fiancée," Wade corrected, "which means she has every right to tell you to leave. So, leave." The men didn't move. The moment stretched out, tense and dangerous. Claire could feel Wade vibrating with barely controlled anger beside her. Then horses approached from the road. Everyone turned to see Sheriff Morrison riding up with 2 deputies. "Evening, gentlemen," Morrison said, his tone deceptively mild. "Awful late for a social call." "We were just leaving," Grant said quickly. "Good. Because if I have to come back out here for another noise complaint, I'm going to start making arrests for trespassing and disturbing the peace." Morrison looked at each man in turn. "Wade Mercer's personal business is his own. And if I catch any of you harassing him or his intended again, we're going to have a very different conversation. Understood?" Muttered agreements. The men turned their horses and rode off into the darkness. Morrison tipped his hat to Wade and Clara. "Try to have a quiet night, folks." He left too. Suddenly, the yard was empty except for the 2 of them and the dying torches. Wade lowered the rifle. His hands were shaking slightly. "Are you okay?" Clara asked. "Fine, you?" "I don't know." Clara looked at where the men had been. "They really hate the idea of us marrying. They hate the idea of you rising above the place they decided you should stay in." Wade set the rifle aside. "Come on, let's go inside." They went into the house. Wade locked the door and checked all the windows while Clara put coffee on with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. When the coffee was ready, they sat at the table in silence. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," Clara said finally. Wade wrapped his hands around his cup. "Probably. We could call it off, tell the town we've decided not to marry after all. That would stop this. Is that what you want?" Clara thought about it. Really thought about it. Going back to town meant constant harassment. Staying here unmarried meant more visits like tonight. But marrying Wade meant tying herself permanently to a man who saw her as a solution to a problem, nothing more. All the options were terrible. But at least marriage came with a ring and legal protection and the right to tell people to get off her property. "No," she said. "I don't want to call it off." Wade nodded. "Good. Neither do I." They finished their coffee. Clara washed the cups while Wade did one more check of the property. When they met back in the kitchen, Wade hesitated. "You should take my room," he said. "It's bigger, more secure. I'll move my things to the small room." "I'm not kicking you out of your own bedroom. Clara, we're getting married in 2 weeks anyway. Might as well get used to, She stopped. Heat flooded her face. "I mean, we should probably discuss sleeping arrangements for after." Wade's expression was carefully neutral. "What do you want the arrangements to be?" What Clara wanted was for him to want to share a room with her, to want to share a bed, to look at her like she was desirable instead of just useful. But that wasn't going to happen. "Separate rooms is fine," she said. "Like you said, yours is more secure. You should keep it." Wade looked like he might argue, but he just nodded. "All right, but if you feel unsafe at any point, I'll tell you." They stood in the kitchen, the weight of unspoken things heavy between them. Finally, Wade said goodnight and retreated to his room. Clara went to hers and sat on the bed and tried not to cry. In 2 weeks, she'd be married. In 2 weeks, everything would change. And Clara had absolutely no idea if she was making the best decision of her life or the worst. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday morning at the courthouse. No ceremony, no guests, just Clara and Wade, and a judge who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The week leading up to it crawled by with excruciating slowness. Clara threw herself into work, finishing the chicken coop and starting repairs on the barn's sagging west wall. Wade matched her pace, both of them using exhaustion as a shield against having to talk about what was coming. On Thursday, 2 days before the wedding, a package arrived. Clara was mucking stalls when Wade appeared in the barn doorway, holding a brown paper parcel. "This came for you," he said. Clara set down her pitchfork, confused. "For me? Who from?" "No return address." She took the package, noting how light it was. Inside was fabric, yards of cream-colored cotton with tiny embroidered flowers along the hem, and underneath a note in handwriting Clara didn't recognize. "Every bride deserves a proper dress. Good luck. A friend." Clara stared at the fabric, her throat tight. Someone in town, someone who hadn't signed their name, had sent her wedding dress material. Not a dress itself, which would have been too presumptuous, but the means to make one. "What is it?" Wade asked. Clara showed him. Wade's expression softened in a way she rarely saw. "You know how to sew? Enough to make it work." Clara ran her fingers over the fabric. It was nicer than anything she'd ever owned. "I don't know who sent this. Does it matter?" "I guess not." Clara looked up at him. "I wasn't going to wear anything special. Figured it didn't matter for a courthouse wedding." "It matters," Wade said quietly. "You should have something nice." He left before Clara could respond. She stood alone in the barn holding fabric that smelled like lavender and tried not to cry for the 3rd time that week. That evening, after dinner, Clara spread the fabric on the kitchen table and started cutting. She'd learned basic sewing at the boarding house. Everyone had to know how to mend their own clothes. But this was different. This required precision and care she wasn't sure she had. Wade appeared in the doorway. "Need help?" Clara almost laughed. "You know how to sew?" "Emma taught me some basics. Figured it was a useful skill." He sat down across from her. "I can do straight seams, at least." So they worked together, Wade following Clara's instructions with the same focused intensity he brought to everything. The domesticity of it made Clara's chest ache. This was what a real marriage might look like. 2 people working together on something that mattered, comfortable in each other's presence. But that wasn't what they were building. They were building a legal arrangement that would stop gossip and let Clara stay on the ranch. Nothing more. "You're thinking too loud," Wade said. Clara looked up from her stitching. "What?" "Whatever's in your head right now, it's making you tense. Your shoulders are up around your ears." She forced herself to relax. "Just nervous. About Saturday. It's just paperwork. We sign some documents, judge declares us married, we come home. And then what?" Wade's hand stilled on the fabric. "What do you mean?" After we're married, what changes? Nothing has to change. We keep doing what we've been doing. But people will expect. Clara stopped, started again. As your wife, there will be expectations, social obligations. I'll need to know how to act. Wade set down his needle. Act like yourself. That's all I want. Yourself isn't good enough for most people. It's good enough for me. The words settled between them, simple and complicated all at once. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he really did value her as she was. But years of being told she wasn't enough had carved deep grooves in her thinking. They finished the dress around midnight. It wasn't perfect. The hem was slightly crooked, and one sleeve was tighter than the other. But it was hers, made by her hands and Wade's, sitting together at the kitchen table like a real couple. Clara hung it carefully in her room and tried not to think about how much she wanted this to be real. Friday morning brought more trouble. Clara was feeding the chickens when she heard horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. She looked up to see a group of women riding into the yard, led by none other than Marjorie Calloway. Clara's stomach dropped. She set down the feed bucket and walked to meet them, very aware that Wade was in the far pasture checking fence lines and wouldn't hear if she called. Marjorie dismounted with theatrical slowness. The other women, 5 of them, all respectable town wives, followed suit. "Clara," Marjorie said, her voice dripping false concern. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About your impending marriage. We're here as representatives of the Black Hollow Women's Committee to make sure you understand what you're doing." Clara crossed her arms. "I'm marrying Wade Mercer. I understand perfectly." "Do you?" One of the other women stepped forward. Mrs. Harrison, the banker's wife. "Because we've done some investigating, Clara, and we've discovered some troubling facts about your situation here." "What facts?" "That Wade Mercer has been paying you wages far below the standard rate for ranch labor. That you've been living here without proper supervision or chaperoning. That there's been no female presence to ensure your virtue remains intact." Mrs. Harrison's smile was razor sharp. "In short, dear, you've been taken advantage of. And this marriage is simply Wade's way of legitimizing an improper relationship." Clara's face burned. "That's not true." "Isn't it? You arrived here as an employee. Now suddenly you're becoming his wife. What changed, if not the nature of your relationship?" "What changed is the town won't leave us alone," Clara shot back. "You're the ones who demanded this marriage. You and Sheriff Morrison and everyone else who couldn't stand the idea of me working here. We demanded proper arrangements, not a sham wedding." Marjorie moved closer. "Clara, listen to me. You don't have to do this. We can help you find respectable employment in town, a real position with proper wages and oversight." "At your boarding house? Or elsewhere? The milliner needs an assistant. The hotel needs kitchen staff. You have options that don't involve tying yourself to a man who's clearly using you." Clara looked at the circle of women, all watching her with expressions ranging from pity to contempt. They thought they were rescuing her, saving her from a terrible mistake. They had no idea. "Wade isn't using me," Clara said quietly. "He's the only person who's ever treated me like I matter, the only person who's ever seen past what I look like to what I can do. So you can take your concern and your job offers and leave. I'm marrying him tomorrow, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." "You're making a mistake," Mrs. Harrison warned. "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." The women exchanged glances. Marjorie's expression hardened. "Very well. But when this falls apart, and it will fall apart, don't come crying to us. You've made your choice." They remounted and rode away. Clara stood in the yard, shaking with anger and fear and something that might have been pride. She'd stood up to them. Again. It was getting easier each time. Wade appeared from the far pasture 10 minutes later, moving fast. "I saw riders. What happened?" "The women's committee came to save me from making a terrible mistake." Wade's jaw tightened. "Let me guess. They think I'm using you. And that I'm too stupid to see it." Clara kicked at the dirt. "They offered me jobs in town, respectable employment with proper oversight. You want to take them up on it?" Clara looked at him, really looked at him, tall and solid and scowling at the horizon like he could intimidate the entire town through sheer force of will. He'd defended her, paid her debts, offered her marriage to keep her safe. He wasn't perfect. He was gruff and emotionally closed off and terrible at expressing anything that wasn't anger. but he'd never once made her feel small. "No," she said. "I want to stay here." Wade's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Good." They went back to work. But Clara couldn't shake the encounter. The women's words kept circling in her head, finding purchase in her existing doubts. Was this marriage a mistake? Was she fooling herself thinking it could work? That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at her wedding dress hanging on the back of the door and tried to imagine tomorrow. Walking into that courthouse, signing the papers, becoming Clara Mercer. The fear was overwhelming. She got up and padded to the kitchen for water. Wade was there already, sitting at the table in the dark. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. Clara poured herself water and sat down across from him. Nervous. "Me too." That surprised her. "You are?" "Yeah. Turns out getting married is kind of a big deal, even when it's practical." Wade's smile was wry. "I keep thinking about Emma, what she'd say if she could see this." Clara went still. He rarely mentioned his late wife anymore. "She'd probably laugh," Wade continued. "Tell me I'm an idiot for making everything so complicated. Emma was good at the simple approach. See a problem, fix it, move on. No overthinking." He looked at Clara. "You remind me of her sometimes. The way you just work without complaining. The way you make things better just by being there." "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me," Clara said quietly. "It's just the truth." They sat in the darkness for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Wade spoke again. "I know this isn't what you probably imagined for your wedding. No big ceremony, no family, just a quick trip to the courthouse." "I never imagined a wedding at all," Claire admitted. "Didn't think anyone would want to marry me." "Then we're both getting something we didn't expect." Wade stood. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He left. Clara sat alone and finished her water and tried to calm the storm in her chest. Tomorrow she'd be married. Tomorrow everything would change. She just hoped she was ready for it. Saturday morning arrived gray and cold, threatening rain. Clara dressed carefully in her new dress, her fingers clumsy with nerves. The fabric felt strange against her skin, too nice, too delicate, like it belonged to someone else. Wade was already in the kitchen when she emerged. He'd put on his best clothes, dark pants, a white shirt that was only slightly worn, a vest that had seen better days but was clean. He'd shaved and combed his hair back, though it was already escaping to fall across his forehead. He looked good. Better than good. And the way he stopped mid-movement when he saw Clara made her heart do something complicated. "You look—" Wade stopped, cleared his throat. "The dress came out nice." "Thank you." Clara smoothed the skirt with damp palms. "We should probably go. Don't want to be late." The ride into town was silent. Wade drove the wagon while Clara sat beside him, hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. The landscape rolled past, familiar now after months of traveling this road. But everything felt different today, sharper, more real. Black Hollow came into view, and Clara's stomach clenched. A few people were out despite the early hour, and every single one stopped to stare as the wagon passed. News of the wedding had clearly spread. Wade pulled up to the courthouse and set the brake. "Ready?" No, Clara thought, but she nodded anyway. They climbed down and walked to the entrance. The building was old stone, imposing and official. Clara's legs felt weak as they climbed the steps. Inside, Sheriff Morrison was waiting. He looked tired. "Mercer, Miss Whitmore." He gestured down the hall. "Judge Anderson is ready for you." They followed him to a small office where a balding man sat behind a massive desk. Judge Anderson looked up when they entered, his expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Mercer, Miss Whitmore, please sit." They sat. The judge shuffled papers, not looking at them. "Before we proceed, I'm required to ask if both parties are entering this marriage of their own free will, without coercion or undue influence." "Yes," Wade said. Yes," Clara echoed. The judge finally looked up. His gaze moved between them, assessing. "You understand this is a legally binding contract? That once signed, you'll be bound by the laws of marriage in this territory." "We understand," Wade said. More paperwork. The judge explained the terms, rights, responsibilities, legal implications. Clara tried to follow, but the words blurred together. All she could focus on was Wade's hand resting on the desk beside hers, close enough to touch, but not touching. "Sign here," the judge said, pushing the document forward. Wade signed first, his signature bold and clear. Then it was Clara's turn. She picked up the pen, her hand shaking so badly the nib scratched. "Clara Whitmore," she wrote. One last time. "And here," the judge said, indicating another line. Wade signed again. Then Clara. And just like that, it was done. "By the authority vested in me by this territory, I declare you husband and wife." The judge's voice was flat, like he'd said these words 1,000 times and would say them 1,000 more. "Congratulations!" It was the least celebratory congratulations Clara had ever heard. They stood. Wade offered his hand to shake, which the judge accepted briefly. Then they were walking out, back through the hallway, down the steps, into the gray morning. Married. Clara was married. She was Clara Mercer now. The reality hit her all at once, so overwhelming she had to stop walking. Wade paused beside her, concerned. "You all right?" "I don't know." Clara looked at her hands like they might look different somehow. "That was fast." "Yeah. I thought it would feel more significant." Wade's laugh was short and humorless. "Welcome to government bureaucracy." They climbed back into the wagon. Wade drove them out of town, neither speaking. Clara watched the buildings pass, hyper-aware of everything. The weight of the dress, the ring Wade had produced from somewhere, and slipped on her finger during the ceremony. The fact that she was now legally bound to the man sitting beside her. Halfway home, it started to rain. They were still 15 minutes from the ranch when the sky opened up completely. Wade urged the horses faster, but within seconds they were both soaked. Clara's carefully made dress was plastered to her skin. Wade's hair dripped water into his eyes. They made it to the barn and Wade pulled the wagon inside, both of them breathing hard. The horses stamped and shook themselves, equally annoyed by the downpour. Clara climbed down and immediately slipped in a puddle. Wade caught her before she fell, his hands gripping her arms. They stood there dripping and staring at each other, both breathing hard. "Some wedding day," Wade said. Clara started laughing. She couldn't help it. The absurdity of the whole situation was too much. They'd gotten married in a courthouse in front of a bored judge, driven home in silence, and now stood soaking wet in a barn while rain hammered the roof. Wade started laughing too, and suddenly they were both doubled over, laughing so hard Clara's sides hurt. "We should get to the house," Wade said finally, wiping his eyes. "Before we catch our deaths." They ran through the rain, splashing through puddles. Inside the house was blessedly warm. Clara stood dripping on the kitchen floor, her beautiful dress ruined. "Go change," Wade said. "I'll make coffee." Clara went to her room and peeled off the wet dress carefully. It was wrecked, the hem caked in mud, the delicate fabric waterlogged. She hung it up anyway, hoping it might dry salvageable. Then she put on her regular work dress and felt immediately more like herself. When she returned to the kitchen, Wade had coffee waiting and a fire going in the stove. He changed too, back into his normal clothes. They sat at the table and drank coffee and listened to the rain, and Clara felt the strangeness of the morning start to settle. "So," Wade said finally, "we're married." "We are. Nothing has to change. You know that, right? Just because there's paperwork doesn't mean—" "I know." Clara wrapped her hands around her cup. "Business as usual." Wade nodded, but something in his expression looked almost disappointed. They spent the rest of the day doing normal work, feeding livestock, checking on repairs, organizing the tack room. It was almost possible to forget that anything had changed. Almost. That night, Clara made dinner while Wade did final evening chores. When he came back in, she'd set the table like always, made stew like always, poured coffee like always. Everything was the same. Everything was completely different. They ate in silence for a while before Wade spoke. "Morrison stopped by while you were gathering eggs. Wanted to make sure the wedding went through." Clara's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "What did you tell him?" "That we're legally married as of this morning, and the town can stop harassing us now." Wade's jaw was tight. He said congratulations and left. "Think we might actually get some peace for a while. Until they find something else to criticize." "Probably." Clara pushed food around her plate. "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" Wade looked up sharply. "No, do you?" "I don't know yet." The honesty felt dangerous but necessary. "Ask me again in a month." "Fair enough." After dinner, they fell into their normal routine. Clara washed dishes, Wade checked the doors and windows. They both retreated to their separate rooms. Clara lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about the fact that she was married now, legally bound to Wade Mercer, and absolutely nothing had changed. She must have slept eventually because she woke to the sound of something crashing outside. Clara bolted upright, heart racing. More crashes, followed by the unmistakable sound of cattle in distress. She threw on her robe and ran for the door. Wade was already in the kitchen, pulling on his boots. "Something's wrong with the herd," he said. "Stay inside." "Not a chance." They ran outside together into chaos. The cattle were stampeding, crashing through fences and scattering across the property. In the moonlight, Clara could see what had spooked them, a pack of coyotes darting between the panicked animals. "Get to the barn," Wade shouted over the noise. "Ring the bell, scare them off." Clara ran for the barn while Wade grabbed his rifle. She found the bell, a massive iron thing used for emergencies, and started ringing it as hard as she could. The sound was deafening, echoing across the property. The coyotes scattered, but the cattle were still running. Wade fired shots into the air, trying to turn the herd before they destroyed what was left of the south fence. Clara kept ringing the bell until her arms screamed. Finally, gradually, the cattle slowed, stopped running, started milling around in confused clusters, still spooked, but no longer stampeding. Wade appeared beside Clara, breathing hard. "Stop. They're calming down." Clara lowered the bell, her arms shaking with exhaustion. The yard was destroyed, fences down, gates hanging crooked, scattered equipment everywhere. And in the middle of it all, Wade and Clara stood side by side, both in their nightclothes, both covered in mud. "Well," Wade said after a moment, "so much for our wedding night." Clara looked at him. He looked at her. And they both started laughing again, that same helpless laughter from earlier. "This is our life now," Clara said between gasps. "Married less than 12 hours and already fighting off coyotes. Could be worse." "How?" "Could be wolves." They spent the next 2 hours securing the cattle and doing emergency fence repairs by lantern light. By the time they finished, the sun was rising and they were both dead on their feet. Back in the kitchen, Wade made coffee while Clara collapsed into a chair. "Some wedding day," she said, echoing his words from earlier. "Some wedding night," Wade corrected. He set coffee in front of her and sat down heavily. "Emma and I had a church wedding with half the town there. Fancy dress, fancy cake, the works. And you know what I remember most about it?" "What?" "Being terrified the whole time, worried I'd mess up my vows or step on her dress or do something to embarrass us both." Wade stared into his cup. "But last night, fighting coyotes with you, I wasn't scared at all, just focused on getting the job done." Clara didn't know what to say to that. "Point is," Wade continued, "maybe we're doing this backwards. Maybe we're supposed to have the crisis first and the ceremony after. Makes more sense for us anyway." "Does it?" "Yeah, we're not fancy people, Clara. We're work people. And last night felt more real than anything in that courthouse." He was right. The paperwork had felt hollow, performative. But working beside Wade in the dark, both fighting to protect what they'd built together, that had felt real. "We should probably sleep," Clara said, "before something else tries to kill us." Wade smiled. "Probably." They went to their separate rooms. Clara fell into bed without even taking off her muddy clothes and was asleep before her head hit the pillow. She woke hours later to knocking on the front door. Clara stumbled out of bed, disoriented and aching, and made her way to the kitchen. Wade was already there, equally disheveled, opening the door. Samuel Torres stood on the porch, hat in hand. "Mercer, Mrs. Mercer." He nodded to Clara, and hearing the new name sent a jolt through her. "Sorry to disturb you, but we've got a problem in town. Sheriff Morrison asked if you could come." Wade's expression darkened. "What kind of problem?" "The kind where the Women's Committee is holding an emergency meeting about your marriage, and they're threatening to petition the territorial governor to have it annulled." Clara felt the words like a punch to the stomach. Annulled. They wanted to erase the marriage before it had even started. Wade's face went dark. "On what grounds?" Torres shifted uncomfortably. "They're claiming coercion, that Clara was forced into the marriage due to her circumstances and your position of power as her employer. Mrs. Calloway's leading the charge." Of course she was. Clara should have known Marjorie wouldn't let this go. "That's insane," Wade said. "Clara chose to marry me." Nobody forced her. I know that, Sheriff knows that. But the Women's Committee has influence, and they're making a lot of noise. Morrison thinks you should come address it directly before it gets out of hand. Wade looked at Clara. She could see the question in his eyes. Do we fight this or let it go? The old Clara, the one who'd arrived at this ranch 6 months ago, would have run, would have accepted that she didn't deserve happiness and slunk away to whatever hole the town decided she belonged in. But that Clara was gone. We'll come, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Wade nodded once, sharp. Give us 20 minutes. Torres left. Clara and Wade changed quickly into clean clothes, neither speaking. The silence felt heavy with unspoken things. In the bedroom she now thought of as hers, though nothing official had changed, Clara caught sight of herself in the small mirror Wade had hung last month. She looked different. Not her face or body, those were the same as always. But something in her eyes had changed. There was steel there that hadn't existed before. They rode into town side by side on horseback, Wade having decided the wagon was too slow. The morning was crisp and clear, the storm from yesterday completely gone. Black Hollow came into view, and Claire could see a crowd gathered at the town hall. Looks like the whole town showed up, Wade muttered. Good, let them all hear. Wade glanced at her, something like pride flickering across his face. They dismounted in front of the hall. The crowd parted, people whispering as Wade and Clara walked through. Clara kept her chin up, her shoulders back. She was done shrinking. Inside the hall, chairs had been arranged theater-style, all facing a raised platform where Marjorie Calloway stood with several other women from the committee. Sheriff Morrison was off to the side, looking deeply uncomfortable. Judge Anderson sat in the front row, his expression unreadable. Marjorie's eyes lit up when she saw them enter. Ah, the happy couple. How lovely of you to join us. Cut the act, Marjorie, Wade said. What's this really about? This is about protecting a vulnerable young woman from being exploited. Marjorie's voice carried across the room, pitched for the audience. Clara Whitmore, Clara Mercer, was in a desperate situation. No money, no family, nowhere to go. You offered her employment, and when she proved useful, you pressured her into marriage to legitimize an improper living arrangement. That's not what happened, Clara said. Isn't it? You arrived at his ranch as an employee. You lived there alone with him for months. And when the town rightfully expressed concern about the impropriety of the situation, suddenly you're getting married. Marjorie shook her head sadly. It's a clear case of coercion, whether you realize it or not. I'm not a child, Clara shot back. I made my own choice. Did you? Or did you simply choose the option that seemed least terrible? Stay on the ranch and marry your employer, or lose your job and your home and end up on the streets? Marjorie looked around the room. That's not a real choice. That's desperation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara felt rage building in her chest, hot and sharp. You want to talk about desperation? Clara's voice rang out, stronger than she'd ever heard it. Let's talk about your boarding house, Mrs. Calloway. About how you take in girls with nowhere to go and work them 16 hours a day for scraps. About how you charge them for their beds and their food and their candles until they can never save enough to leave. About how you encourage the other girls to torment anyone who doesn't fit your idea of acceptable. Marjorie's face flushed. How dare you? I dare because it's true. You kept me trapped there for 5 years. And when I finally found a way out, you tried to drag me back with fake debts. When that didn't work, you came to the ranch with your committee friends to save me. And now you're here trying to destroy the one good thing I've built because you can't stand that I escaped. The room had gone completely silent. This isn't about protecting me, Clara continued. This is about punishing me for refusing to stay in the place you decided I belonged. Well, I'm done letting you decide anything about my life. She turned to address the whole room. I married Wade Mercer because I wanted to. Because he treats me with respect and pays me fair wages and never once made me feel like I was worthless. Because we work well together and we're building something real on that ranch. Is it a love match? No. But it's honest and it's ours and it's nobody's business but ours. Clara's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. So petition the governor if you want. Try to annul the marriage, but know that you're not saving me from anything. You're just proving that this town would rather tear people down than let them rise. She sat down. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. Wade sat beside her, so close their shoulders touched. Finally, Sheriff Morrison stood. Mrs. Calloway, I've heard enough. There's no grounds for annulment here. The marriage was legal and consensual. Unless you have actual evidence of coercion, not just speculation, this meeting is over. But Sheriff, it's over. Morrison's voice was firm. These folks have as much right to marriage as anyone in this room. And frankly, I'm tired of this committee deciding who's acceptable and who isn't. More murmurs, but different this time. People were nodding. A few were even looking at Marjorie with something like disgust. Then someone in the back stood up. It was David Chen from the lumber mill. I was at the Mercer Ranch after the storm, he said. Saw what they've built there. The place was dying when Wade was running it alone. Now it's thriving. That's Clara's doing as much as his. Maybe instead of trying to tear them apart, we should be thanking her for saving one of the biggest ranches in the territory. Another person stood. Mrs. Patterson from the general store. I sent Clara that fabric for her dress. Anonymous, because I didn't want the committee coming after me. But I'm tired of hiding. This town has treated that girl like garbage since she arrived, and it's shameful. She deserves better from us. One by one, people stood. Not everyone. Emmeline and Grace stayed seated, glaring. Marcus Holbrook looked away. But enough people stood that Marjorie's face went white. Well, Judge Anderson said, rising from his seat, I think that settles it. The marriage stands. Mrs. Calloway, if you continue to harass these people, I'll consider it grounds for legal action. Marjorie looked around the room, searching for support and finding none. Her committee members had gone quiet, clearly unwilling to go down with her ship. This isn't over, Marjorie said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Yeah, it is, Wade said. He stood, offering his hand to Clara. Come on, we've got work to do. They walked out of the town hall together. The crowd parted again, but this time some people nodded respectfully. A few even smiled. Outside, the morning sun was bright and warm. Clara's legs felt weak with relief and residual adrenaline. You okay? Wade asked quietly. I don't know. Ask me later. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was different from the silence on the way in. Easier. Like something had been settled. At home, Wade took care of the horses while Clara went inside to start lunch. Her hands were still shaking as she pulled out bread and cheese. She'd stood up to the entire town. She'd told them the truth about Marjorie, about the boarding house, about everything, and they'd listened. Wade came in as she was setting the table. He stopped in the doorway, watching her. What you said back there, about the marriage not being a love match. Clara's hand stilled. I was being honest. Isn't that what you wanted? Yeah, but Wade crossed the room until he was standing across the table from her. I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen, because if I stop talking, I might not start again. Clara sat down slowly. Wade stayed standing, his hands gripping the back of a chair. When Emma died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd had my one chance at love and it was gone. So I buried myself in work and anger and told myself I was fine alone. He took a breath. Then you showed up. And at first, yeah, I just saw you as help. Someone desperate enough to put up with me. But somewhere along the way, that changed. Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear him over it. I noticed things, Wade continued, like how you hum when you're working on something you enjoy, how you talk to the horses like they're people, how you always save the burnt parts of dinner for yourself instead of giving them to me, how you've never once complained, even when I've been an ass and the work's been impossible. He finally looked at her directly. I noticed that you make this place feel like a home instead of just a house. That you're braver than anyone I've ever met. That when you smile, really smile, not that polite thing you do for other people, it's like the sun coming out. Clara couldn't breathe. So when I asked you to marry me, yeah, part of it was practical, but part of it, Wade stopped, started again. Part of it was because I didn't want to imagine this ranch without you, didn't want to imagine my life without you. And I know that's not fair to drop on you now, after we've already signed the papers and agreed this was just business. But I couldn't let you keep thinking that you're not, Wade, Clara interrupted softly. I love you. Wade's mouth snapped shut. He stared at her. I've loved you since the storm, Clara continued, the words pouring out now that she'd started. Maybe before that, I don't know. But standing on that porch with your arm around me, I knew. And it's been killing me, thinking you just saw me as a useful employee while I was falling in love with everything about you. Everything? Wade's voice was rough. Your terrible coffee, your worst jokes, the way you pretend to be all gruff, but you left me gloves before the hard jobs. The way you stood up to Holbrook and paid my debts and married me, even though it meant fighting the whole town. Clara stood, moving around the table until she was standing in front of him. Everything. Wade reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his rough, calloused hands. I'm not good at this, he said, at feelings and words, and neither am I. But I want to try. If you're willing, I'm willing. Wade kissed her. It was awkward and uncertain and perfect. Clara's hands found his shoulders, holding on like he might disappear if she let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. So, he said. What now? Clara smiled. Now we eat lunch, and then we fix the fence the cattle destroyed, and then we figure out the rest as we go. That's it? That's everything. They ate lunch and fixed the fence, and as the sun started to set, they stood together in the yard looking at the ranch they'd built together. The barn was clean and organized. The corrals were repaired. The chicken coop stood sturdy and new. The fields rolled away toward the mountains, peaceful and productive. It wasn't perfect. There were still sections of fence that needed work, and the barn roof wouldn't last forever, and the house needed painting, but it was theirs. I should probably move my things, Clara said. To your room, our room. Wade's arm tightened around her waist. Yeah. Unless you want to keep separate. No, I want you in my room. In my bed. In my life. He looked down at her. I want all of it, Clara. If you're offering. I'm offering. They moved Clara's belongings that evening. It didn't take long, she still didn't own much. But seeing her clothes hanging next to Wade's, her hairbrush on the dresser beside his razor, made it real in a way the paperwork hadn't. That night, they lay together in Wade's bed, their bed, and talked until the stars came out. About the future. About the ranch. About whether they wanted children eventually. About all the ordinary, extraordinary things that couples discuss when they're building a life together. And when Clara finally fell asleep, it was with Wade's arm around her and the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Clara was making breakfast when she heard horses. She looked out to see 5 wagons rolling into the yard, led by David Chen. Wade, she called, we've got company. They went outside together. Chen climbed down from his wagon, followed by Samuel Torres, Mrs. Patterson, and a dozen other people from town. Even Sheriff Morrison was there. Morning, Chen said. We've been talking about what Clara said yesterday and about how this town's treated both of you, and we figured actions speak louder than apologies. He gestured to the wagons. We brought supplies, lumber, paint, roofing materials, figured we'd help you finish those repairs if you'll have us. Clara stared. You want to help? We want to make things right, Mrs. Patterson said, or at least start to. Wade looked at Clara. She looked back at him, and they both nodded. We'd appreciate the help, Wade said. The town descended on the ranch like a friendly invasion. Men worked on the barn roof and the remaining fence sections. Women helped Clara organize the house and paint the porch. Children played with the chickens and got underfoot in that universal way children have. By evening, the ranch had been transformed. The barn had a new roof, all the fences were repaired, the house gleamed with fresh white paint. It looked like the place Clara had imagined in her head, but never thought they'd achieve. As people were packing up to leave, Mrs. Patterson pulled Clara aside. I owe you an apology, she said. We all do. We let Marjorie Calloway and women like her dictate who was acceptable in this town, and we treated you accordingly. That was wrong. Thank you, Clara said quietly. For what it's worth, I think you and Wade are good for each other. And that ranch, it needed both of you to bring it back to life. Mrs. Patterson squeezed her hand. Welcome to Black Hollow, Mrs. Mercer. For real this time. After everyone left, Wade and Clara stood in the yard surveying the work. The ranch looked better than it had in years. Better than Wade's father had kept it, even. We did this, Clara said softly. We did, Wade agreed. He pulled her close, wrapping both arms around her. And we're going to keep doing it. Building this place. Building a life. Together. Together, Clara repeated. That night, they had dinner with the doors and windows open, letting the warm evening air flow through the house. After they sat on the porch and watched the sunset paint the sky gold and orange and deep purple. "You know what I realized today?" Wade said. "What?" "The girls at the boarding house sent you here thinking they were playing a joke, thinking you'd fail and I'd throw you out and everyone would have a good laugh." "I remember," Wade smiled, "but the joke was on them because they sent me the best thing that ever happened to me. They just didn't know it." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "I'm glad I came here, even though I was terrified, even though I thought I'd last maybe a day. I'm glad you stayed, even though I was an ass and worked you half to death." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The cattle lowed softly in their pasture. The chickens settled in their new coop with contented clucking. The ranch was alive with sound and purpose. And for the first time in 6 years, Wade Mercer felt complete. Not because the grief was gone, it would never be fully gone, but because he'd learned that it was possible to lose everything and still find something worth building again. Clara had taught him that, not through words, but through actions, through showing up every single day and working harder than anyone he'd ever known, through refusing to quit even when quitting would have been easier, through believing in the possibility of something better even when everyone told her she was worthless. And Clara, she'd learned that her worth wasn't determined by what other people thought of her, that she could be strong and capable and deserving of love, that the girl everyone had dismissed as useless was actually the strongest person in Black Hollow. The ranch had saved them both, but really, they'd saved each other. 3 months later, on a warm autumn morning, Clara stood in the barn watching Wade teach a new ranch hand the proper way to muck stalls. They'd needed to hire help. The ranch was producing enough now that 2 people couldn't handle everything alone. The new hand was a young man from 2 towns over who'd heard that the Mercer Ranch paid fair wages and treated workers with respect. Word was spreading. They'd had 5 applicants for the position. Wade caught Clara watching and winked at her. She smiled back, one hand resting on her stomach where a tiny flutter had started making itself known. They hadn't told anyone yet. It was too early, and Clara was scared to jinx it. But Wade knew, because of course he did. He'd noticed her morning sickness, her exhaustion, the way she'd stopped lifting heavy things without being told. And every evening, he'd sit with her and they'd talk about names and nurseries and all the terrifying, wonderful possibilities ahead. The baby wouldn't replace Sarah. Nothing could. But it would be theirs, a new life born from everything they'd built together. Clara left the barn and walked through the ranch, taking inventory like she did every morning. The garden was producing late vegetables. The chickens were laying well. The cattle were healthy and sleek. The fields were ready for harvest. Everything was working. Not perfectly. There were always problems, always repairs needed, always challenges. But it was working. She ended up on the porch, the same spot where she'd stood that first day 6 months ago. Then, she'd been terrified and desperate and certain she wouldn't last the week. Now she was home. Wade finished with the new hand and came to join her, sliding an arm around her waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You okay?" he asked. "Better than okay." Clara leaned into him. "I was just thinking about that first day. How different everything is now. You were so scared, I could see you shaking. You were planning to send me away. Best decision I never made." Wade kissed the top of her head. "Keeping you, I mean, not sending you away." "I know what you meant." They stood together watching the sun climb higher, burning off the morning mist. In the distance, the mountains stood sharp and clear against the blue sky. The ranch spread out before them, alive and thriving, and theirs. And Clara Mercer, no longer Whitmore, no longer the town joke, no longer the girl sent to be humiliated, finally understood what it meant to be home. Not a place, a person. The person standing beside her, who'd seen past everything she'd been told she was and recognized everything she could be. The person who'd given her a chance when no one else would. The person who'd become her partner, her husband, her home. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." Simple words, but they contained everything. All the work and struggle and triumph that had brought them here. All the days ahead they'd face together. All the challenges they'd overcome because they had each other. The ranch was their foundation, but love was what made it home. And that, Clara thought, was worth every terrible day that had come before. Every cruel word, every moment of doubt, every time she'd wondered if she should just give up. Because all of it had led her here, to this porch, this man, this life, to a place where she was wanted, valued, loved, to the understanding that sometimes the worst jokes turn into the best stories, and that the girl nobody wanted could become the woman nobody could replace. Clara smiled and turned in Wade's arms, pulling his face down to hers for a kiss. Behind them, the ranch hummed with life. Ahead of them, the future stretched out bright and uncertain and full of possibility. But right now, in this moment, everything was exactly as it should be. And that was more than enough. It was everything.